Hello and welcome back to the Tiny Fibre Studio. I'm Bex and it has been a long time since I did a more podcasty type video where I share with you some of my current knitting, spinning and weaving projects. So there's quite a lot to catch up on and I am a little bit rusty. Just a quick reminder, if you are a Patreon supporter, first of all, thank you, but don't forget that you get ad-free access to this video via Patreon as a thank you for supporting my work. Thanks also to everyone who's continued to support me in subscribing, commenting, leaving likes and so on while I've been away. I've been trying to find a more consistent way of filming videos, and while I'm not going to promise anything, I think I might be getting somewhere. I've made some changes to my schedule, which allows me to have longer blocks of time available. So that makes it a little bit easier for me to get into filming something. So hopefully expect more videos in the future. Now I know that Wonderwool Wales is rapidly approaching, but in September last year I went to Yarndale as part of the John Arbon Textiles show team. Thank you to everybody who came to say hello. And since Devon to Yorkshire is a pretty long journey and I wasn't the one driving, I decided to cast on a nice little mindless knit, but I did a little bit of stash diving for it. The first time I ran my spinning blended tops workshop for my guild, I spun up some of this John Arbon Textiles fibre, which was called Oakie. This is 100% Corriedale and it was a special edition for Wonderwool in 2022. I spun it in about 12 different ways to show different colour effects, mostly in small samples, but I did do a couple of 100-gram skeins. I didn't originally intend to use them together in the same project, so they weren't the same weight, but I wanted to knit some larger samples for future classes so that people could see the different styles of spinning and how they would look when they were used in a bigger project. So when I started to think about making a hat, it seemed like a reversible one with different colour effects would be a really fun idea. So my first finished project is a Musselburgh hat, designed by Isolde Teague. I feel like everybody's knitted one of these by now. If you have, let me know how many you've done in the comments. Anyway, apologies if I'm going over old ground here, but basically you start from a circular cast on, work the crown increases, then you have a nice bit of mindless stocking stitch before decreasing again. So you do end up with a slightly weird shaped object, but then you flip one end inside the other, and then you can have either a really slouchy hat, or you can turn the bottom up and have it with a brim. It's a great option for handspun because it's swatchless, so you just cast on with something between fingering and DK weight. Then when you get to a point where you've got enough fabric to measure an inch, you count the number of stitches in that inch and follow the directions for that gauge and size. It's a similar concept to the one that's used in the Anne Budd books, if you have those. On one half, I've got yarn that was spun from the fold and then 3-plied, and on the other half, it's spun short forward draw and also 3-plied. The short forward draw one was a lot finer, so I knitted that half with the yarn held double, and although it feels denser than the other half, it's actually a really good match in terms of gauge. When I wear it slouchy, it's either all from the fold or all short forward draw, and if I wear it with the brim, the top is one drafting method and the brim is the other. It's really dense and warm with up to 4 layers of DK yarn, so it's very warm and squishy, but maybe a little bit too warm for all but the coldest of days here in the UK. I do wish that I had made it slightly bigger because the thickness of all those layers, when I actually put it on my head, the outside layer gets stretched quite a bit. But then this is really more of a sample than something that I'll actually wear, so I'm actually fine with that. Next up is the Mountain Cowl by Andrew Mowry. As soon as I saw this one, I thought it would be great for handspun yarn, especially something with long colour repeats or maybe a gradient. But last summer when I went to the John Arbon Open weekend, I picked up a mini set of their Down the Allotment collection, which was their special edition for last year. I really wanted to use the minis in something where I could use up as much of it as possible. So this pattern seemed like it would be a really good option. You begin with a provisional cast on and work the cowl in the round before adding a twist and grafting the ends together. I cast on 101 stitches because I was using DK rather than the fingering weight that it's designed for. The colour work is done in slip stitches, so you're actually only working with one colour per round, which is perfect, especially if you're new to colour work. Although Down the Allotment wasn't actually designed as a gradient, it was made with base colours being plied together in different combinations. So one colourway might have all of the plies being the same colour, while another one might have different colours for each ply. Because of that, I was able to make a sort of gradient out of it by choosing colours which had at least one ply in common with each other. There were two exceptions. There are two solid colours that only appear in one of the other yarns. So with that, I just split that other colour into two so that I had a way of coming into that colour and then a way of getting out of it again. I really loved this geometric design, and with the colours changing all the time, it just felt like a very Moorish knit. You always wanted to pick it up and just do one extra repeat each time. So it went by quite quickly and I really enjoyed that project. There are some techniques which might be new for a lot of people. Because you add a twist in the cowl before grafting, your needles end up in the wrong place to actually start the graft, and you're also grafting in the round instead of flat like you would for a sock. It is the same idea, but it can be a little bit intimidating if it's the first time that you've done that, and it's not really treated as an unusual thing in the pattern. I've linked a video in the description below which some folks on Ravelry recommended for those who are new to those techniques. Although it's using a different cowl as an example, the techniques apply the same to the Montana Mountain Cowl as well. So I'm really happy with the finished object. I wore it absolutely loads during the winter and I am a little bit sad to be putting it away in a drawer until the autumn, but it will have its time again. There is one tiny little thing which I find a little bit annoying. You start with a main colour setup round and you finish with a main colour round, which means that when you graft the stitches together, the grafting creates a third round, while the gap between all of the other repeats is 2 rounds. I should have stopped one row before I'm told to in the pattern, and my head was telling me that this was going to cause a problem, but I inexplicably chose to ignore it. Maybe one day I will rip it back and take out that extra row, or maybe I won't. On that note, let's go on to some weaving projects before I show you some of the spinning that I've been doing recently. When it comes to weaving, I still class myself very much as a beginner, even though I've had a loom of some kind for probably about 10 years. But there are a few weave structures that I'm a little bit obsessed with, and double weave is one of them. Double weave is fascinating to me from both a pattern and a structural perspective. If you're not familiar, it's where you're weaving 2 or more layers of cloth at the same time, and you can choose to have them either completely separate or interlocking in various different ways. So a common use for it is to have the 2 layers joined at one side, so that when you finish it, you open it up and you have a piece of fabric that's double the width that it was on the loom. That is extremely appealing to me because my space for looms in this house is quite limited. So if I can turn a 12-inch loom into a 24-inch loom, that's very tempting. But that double width example is just one option, and there are so many different variations on the theme that I wanted to do a Doubleweave Sampler to explore the different options. So the one that I'm doing is from the book Doubleweave by Jennifer Moore. She has a 4-shaft and an 8-shaft version, and although the one that I'm working on is an 8-shaft loom, I'm using the 4-shaft version in an attempt to keep things simple. Having said that, it did take me 3 attempts to get it threaded correctly. The book gives you the charted draft with tie-ups for floor looms, but at least for the sampler that I'm doing, it also includes the written instructions, which can be a lot easier for table looms, especially if you're not used to reading those charts. There is a note about this on page 13 about the notation and why the lifting patterns aren't always in numerical order, and I would definitely recommend that you read that before you get started. Because I'm only using the middle 4 shafts on my loom, I do have to rewrite the lift pattern each time. So for example, shaft 1 becomes shaft 3 for my lift pattern, but that's down to my personal decision. That's nothing to do with the book. This is the yarn that I'm using. It's World of Wool's basic weaving yarn in a light and a dark grey. They come in 1.5 kilo cones, and this was on sale, so I paid about £17. Which is something like £1.15 per 100 grams. When I bought it, I'm fairly sure that they said that it was suitable for warp, but I always kind of take that with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because what one person says is suitable for warp is not necessarily what somebody else would think is suitable for warp, and it also depends a lot on what kind of loom you're using. If you're not a weaver, the warp threads, which are the ones that go from the front to the back of the loom, need to be fairly strong because they're held under tension, and they also have to withstand the reed, like a piece of gridded metal, rubbing against them every time you pull the beater forward. But I figured it was worth a shot, even if it was only going to be suitable in the end for weft. Incidentally, the website no longer says that it's suitable for warp, which I think is probably a wise move because it fails the normal test that you do to check the strength. But I threw caution to the wind and decided to try it anyway because the tension that the warp's under on a table loom like this is nowhere near what it would be on a floor loom. And touch wood, it's been okay so far. So this is the loom that I'm weaving it on. It kind of looks enormous with me behind it. It is an Ashford Katie, which is a portable 12-inch 8-shaft loom. This is the first kind of big project that I've woven on it, and it's holding up really well so far. I'm really enjoying the process. So let me talk you through a little bit of what I've been doing in this sampler so far. And yes, this is probably going to mess up my tension, but I have shown lots of other people it this way. Lots of people at Guild were asking all about it. So you start with a couple of options using 2 layers of fabric that are just completely separate from each other. In this case, it's got the white on top and the black underneath, or dark grey underneath, and then you switch the layers around. So you then have the dark grey on the top and the white on the bottom. Then they have you do that in little sections, so you just have like a couple of picks of each colour before it changes to the next. Then you go on to double width. So this is where you've got one side that's completely open, the other side is joined, and again they have you switch between different colours on top. But also the fun bit is that underneath they also have a completely different pattern going on. So that's quite fun. Then you have, I think they call this stitched fabric, where it kind of looks like there's a little run of stitches holding it together. But actually these are 2, again, separate layers. You have a little squishy padded one. That one's quite fun, so you can add some padding in there if you wanted some texture. And then there's a little section of colour and weave, and it's quite fun because on the back is a completely different colour. Then you get on to the next section, which has 3 separate tubes, and the suggestion is like you could use this to make something like, you know, the sleeve of a top or something. And finally one that has a slit in the top of the fabric. So that has been really fun. I've been really enjoying it, and I'm approaching a part that I know is going to take a bit more concentration, because there's a section where you're going to make quite a big pattern across the whole piece, and I know that that is going to take quite a considerable amount of concentration, so I'm gearing myself up for that. So on to a weaving finished object. This is actually the reason that I needed to film this video today, because this is a gift that is going to go to its new owner tomorrow, and it is the Hero Cowl by Ange Sewell of Weft. And I was inspired to make this by somebody from my guild who bought theirs in last weekend, and I just thought this would make a really good birthday gift for my auntie. So I warped it up on Tuesday and finished it on Friday. It looks a little bit strange like this, like it's just way too big, so let me model it for you. The idea is that you put it on and then loop it back over your head like this. I made it on my 12-inch Ashford Knitters loom, which is just a folding rigid heddle loom, but it's only 10 inches in the reed, so you could do it on a narrower loom as well. And apart from the fringe, it is entirely finished on the loom, so no hem stitching or any of that stuff. So let's say that I started here. What I've done is left a bit of warp at the front of the loom, but it's just unwoven. Then continue weaving up here, and at this point the whole thing is just straight. And then when I get to this section, this would have been the back end of the warp, but what I've done is to then use the warp threads, and those are now becoming weft threads that go across here. Even attempting to explain that is still quite tricky, so I would definitely recommend that if you want to give this a go, and I would encourage you to give it a go because I think it's really fun, definitely watch a few videos first to kind of wrap your head around it. I'll link some videos below which I found useful for some little tips as I was going along. The yarn is Blacker Yarn's Brushwork, which was a birthday yarn from some years ago. Hi. Wow. Yeah. I know. Yeah, good boy. We have a visitor. The yarn is Blacker Yarn's Brushwork, which was a birthday yarn, so it's long since discontinued. I think it's listed as sport weight, but it definitely works as DK, so I just used the 7.5 dent per inch reed. It is a woolen spun yarn, so in theory it's not a good warp yarn at all. And it doesn't really survive the usual test, but I felt like it... Hi. You're a very sweet boy, you're kind of making this a little bit tricky. You are? Anyway, what was I saying? Yes, Blacker Yarn's Brushwork, woolen spun, in theory not a good warp yarn. My theory was it was on a rigid heddle loom, and if I was careful about it, I reckoned I could get away with it. Interestingly, the white version of the yarn actually held up a little bit better. So I did do a little bit of a stress test, just moving it in and out of the slots in the reed a few times to see if it caused any issues with friction. It didn't seem to, so I thought I would give it a go, and I survived the entire thing without any broken warp threads. Not even close, not even a little bit of fraying or looking thin or anything like that. It was absolutely fine. So I think it's a little bit of a lesson in you can sometimes get away with warp yarns that don't look like they're ideal. My only note to myself for the future with this pattern is to choose a shorter pattern repeat. I was using this entire block and that was 10 inches long, so I couldn't actually make the most of the whole warp, and I had to finish it sooner than the pattern wanted me to, so it's overall shorter. It fits on me okay, I'm just really hoping that it fits on my auntie. So those are my current weaving projects. So on to the spinning. In all honesty, a lot of the things that I've been spinning over the last few months have been commission spins for other people, and it will make a lot more sense to talk about those when I can discuss them and the whole project that they're part of a little bit more openly. But in the past couple of weeks, I have been at the wheel quite a lot, making samples for a plying class at my guild. So these were all of the yarns that I spun specifically for it. We talked about some of the common problems that people have with plying. So I needed to show the effects of thick and thin singles, different amounts of tension on each single, and underplying. Then we also looked at different structures of yarn. So I did samples of 2, 3 and 4 ply, chain ply, cable plying and boucle. So it's a nice little collection of finished samples. In terms of what's on the wheels at the moment, I've really just got one ongoing project, which is this flax that I started spinning on my Nano at the local flax harvest. They had the BBC filming there, and I thought it might be useful to actually show you some flax spinning. And the Nano was the perfect tool because the weather was looking a bit unpredictable and I could just pop it back in my bag if it started raining. No need to worry about any damage to equipment and stuff, so it was a good little choice. The fibre is flax tow from World of Wool, and I've been spinning it wet, so just kind of keeping my fingers a little bit wet from a bowl of water. I just find it a little bit easier to draft a sort of slightly smoother yarn that way. So I've just been dipping in and out, doing little bits here and there, but it does feel like it's been going on for quite a while, so I probably just need to dedicate some hours to it and just get it done at this point. And my last spinning project is a first. It's a finished skein from cotton that I spun on my book Charkha. I'll talk a little bit more about this in another video, but long story short, I got lucky and acquired a Bosworth Book Charkha on Facebook. It's a thing of beauty. I will tell you more about it in another video, but this is a 3 ply from the first 3 spindles that I spun on it. I initially used some broken cotton tops from my stash, which I think had been cut. So when one section ran out, you had this sort of clump of fibres, and that's where a lot of the slubs come from. But for the final spindle, I switched to unbroken cotton tops and I could really see the difference. I just need to finish it and then work out what I want to do with it. There is a really fun double weave project that I want to do at some stage where you make a drawstring bag entirely finished on the loom. No sewing required. So maybe it will turn into that, but I probably need to do a bit more first. So I think that is everything I want to share for the moment. Let me know what you're working on down in the comments, because I'm sure a lot of us have a sudden burst of inspiration at this time of year and start lots of new projects. So let me know what's caught your interest. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me today, and I will see you again soon.